Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of COVID Conversations, Members Helping Members. Today we've got a really exciting speaker and a very exciting topic too. Bring about what you think about using the pandemic to your advantage. We've had lots of information about how to survive in the pandemic, but I think today's topic is going to kind of re-energize us and get us thinking probably a little bit different about how things are going. Good morning, I'm Scott McCammon, President and CEO of the Milton Chamber of Commerce. And before we get underway, I really want to thank our partners at the Oakville, Milton and District Real Estate Board. We appreciate your being with us on this COVID conversation this morning. I've often said that from crisis comes opportunity, and I think today is one of those times. Our guest speaker, Eddie LeMoine, is a world-renowned speaker who travels the world, normally speaking in different countries, and because of the pandemic, he's now grounded in the Maritimes. And so in this time of isolation, Eddie has very generously offered to do his webinar for some select chambers across Canada. Luckily, we are one of those chambers. So let me tell you a little bit about Eddie before we ask him to start. Drawing on his career as a senior executive, Eddie LeMoine has managed multi-generational teams to achieve outstanding results. Eddie's real-world experience has helped him evolve into a captivating keynote speaker. He has the capacity to deliver at all levels throughout an organization, from the corner office right to the plant floor. And Eddie equips workers with the foundational capabilities they need to be effective in today's world. Eddie has an uncanny ability to read his audience, even virtually, and connect with them, whether they're laughing or crying. And he's touched many hearts and minds around the globe. His audiences have represented 83 countries, and his speeches have been translated into several languages. With his innovation and creativity, Eddie moves people towards brilliance, and the results are immediate. His keynotes and seminars, rich with content, leave audience members energized and with the tools they need to implement change in both their work and personal lives. And with that, Eddie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'm delighted to be here. So let me tell you a little bit about how I'm going to do this session. When I walk on stage, one of the first things I always say to people, are there any questions? So I love to answer questions. So the way we're going to do the format is I'm going to chat for probably around 25, 30 minutes. And then all through that, if you can just throw your questions down below, after I'm finished my presentation, I'll answer all of your questions. And if we don't get to all of your questions, or if I can't answer a question, I would be delighted to follow up. And if you want to reach out to me afterwards, by all means, do that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a presentation with you, and then we'll get started. I'll tell you a little bit about how we're going to do this. There we go. So a few years ago, I wrote a book called Bring About What You Think About It, and had a profound impact on my life, but also on the lives of thousands of people that have read the book since. So, just a little bit about kind of me and how I got here. And, Scott talked about all my professional acronyms, but there's some parts of my life that I'm extremely proud of. And one is my wife, Tanya, and I have been married for 36 years. We actually started dating when we were 15 years old. So, when I look at relationships, both my personal relationships and professional relationships, I see that as a real strong point. And I have two really, really outstanding young adult children. My daughter is a recruiter in Halifax. And my son is a musician. They have a couple albums out. They've been nominated for some ECMA awards here in Atlantic, Canada. So I want to kind of weave through. When I do a talk, it's really about how can we use things both in our professional and our personal life. And by the end of the seminar, there's a couple of things that I kind of want you to walk away with. One is there's a particular statement. And this statement, if you get your head wrapped around it, it can have an incredible impact on your future. It literally can change your life. And it's kind of a statement that I absolutely live my life by. And then I want to talk about the emotions, the role that your emotions are playing right now. And the interesting thing, when we think about what's happening with COVID-19, our emotions are kind of all over the place. So I'll talk about the impact that that's having on your ability to set goals or even be more healthy. 3 steps to setting some goals that stick, because there is a process you can use that actually helps you set some goals that stick. And then 2 ways to accelerate your success, or what are 2 things you can kind of focus your attention on that can really accelerate your success. And I have to tell you, I've been standing in front of audiences for a long time, and I don't believe there's ever been a time in history, especially as long as all of us have been alive, where we have this opportunity. We have an opportunity to to hit that reset button, to kind of get a do-over, to pick an area of your life that you really want to make some changes. And I would suspect that every one of us have something we would like to change. For some people, unfortunately, you might have gained a little bit of weight while you're in this lockdown mode, and you're trying to anticipate, well, how am I going to get ready for the summer? And so for some, it might be health. It might be you want to lose some weight, or maybe you want to become more healthy in other ways, or maybe in your career, you're trying to hit a number, you're trying to hit a sales target or something, and somebody threw a wrench in it, and you're trying to figure out, well, how am I going to do that? Or how am I going to get a promotion or work on a relationship? And that can be a personal or a kind of a private relationship. And I think what we're going to talk about today, I can help you in any area of your life that you want to apply this. For me, I apply it in every area of my life when I find myself in a bit of a struggle. But first, I want to share with you how this all started for me, because this is a pretty unlikely topic for me. It all started in the old Triangle Pub in Halifax. Now, at the time, I was a senior vice president at a large aerospace company here on the East Coast, and I'm sitting down with a client of mine, and his name was Stephen. And Stephen and I are having a little chat, and it's right around, we're heading toward the holiday season at the end of the year, and you're talking about what you're going to do in the next year. And I'm telling him that we're going to launch an airline the next year, and I'm going to take my family to Mexico, and I'm going to lose some weight, and all of the goals that I was going to achieve in the next year. And partway through the conversation, Stephen looked at me and he said, "Eddie," he said, "I have to tell you, if you would change the way you think, your whole life would change." And I looked at him and said, "Stephen, what are you talking about?" He said, "I don't mean to offend you." He said, "But," he said, "you have stinking thinking." I said, "Pardon me, I have what?" He said, "You have stinking thinking." He said, "In one sense, you're telling me your goal, but in the same breath," he said, "you're making up excuses." I said, "No, I'm not, Stephen." He said, "Oh, no, you are. You're going to launch an airline, but the fuel prices are too high, and you're not sure you can be competitive. You're going to lose some weight, but you've tried to do it before, and you're not sure if you're going to be able to do it. You'd love to take your family to Mexico, but you're not sure if you can get the time off to do it." He said, "For every goal," he said, "you have an opposing thought." I said, "Stephen, I've read all those books. Norman Vincent Peale, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, Dale Carnegie." He said, "Eddie, there's a big difference between reading a book and applying it in your life." I was a little bit offended by what Stephen had talked about, but I went home that day and I Googled some of the things that we had chatted about over our lunch conversation. And little did I know, the second I pressed that enter button, my life was going to change forever. It would send me down a path that would be long lasting and far reaching. And I noticed changes. And the first change I noticed was in me physically. I went from weighing 235 pounds to 190 pounds, but I became a better husband. I became a better father. I became a better manager at work. But then I started noticing changes in people around me, my relationships and my family. And I started noticing changes in my children and then colleagues that I was working with and people that I would coach. So I want to share with you over this next little while some things that I use in my personal life, but things that many of the people that I work are now using in their life as well. And simple little tips that you can kind of walk away at the end of this session and kind of look at some of those areas you might want to make some changes. Now, I've done a lot of research in this. And I've kind of looked at 3 ways that our brain works. So the 3 ways we make decisions. And the first thing I looked at was the pure science behind the way the brain works. And here's something that we know for sure. When you're happy, passionate, excited, on purpose, in the work environment, we call it engaged, something interesting happens to the brain. It actually operates at a higher frequency. The body tends to create more serotonin, which is a feel-good hormone. You're more creative. You solve problems better. From a sales perspective, we actually sell more products and services. We solve problems better. But when we kind of go past boredom and we get into fear, anxiety, and stress, which a lot of us are feeling fear, anxiety, and stress right now, a lot of uncertainty, probably more stress in the world now than we've seen probably since one of the world wars in the past. When that happens, the brain actually, the frequency of the brain slows down, the body stops secreting serotonin or reduces the amount of serotonin that it creates and starts to create more cortisol, which is a fight or flight hormone. You don't digest your food as well, you don't solve problems as well. Most people in the sales side of things, your sales actually start to drop off. And that's why we often see salespeople will spiral up or spiral down. And the more you spiral down, the more stress you have, it becomes a bit of a cycle. So we know that just by being more passionate, happy, excited, and believe me, it can be hard to get there right now. Success can come our way a little bit better. And then I looked at psychology, and psychology kind of comes down to questions and answers. Like when you get up this morning, you might have asked yourself a question. You might have said, I'm not feeling good. I'm just feeling a little down. I'm feeling a little off. And in a millisecond, your brain will look for an answer. It goes into your unconscious, it searches through some data, and it'll say, you put 10 pounds on over the last 8 weeks. You're not hitting your numbers at work. You got in a fight with your spouse the other day. You're basically a loser. And what happens is psychologists call this social proof. We literally look for proof. We get in an argument with somebody. We lose another deal. We put another pound on. But if you get up tomorrow morning and you simply asked a different question, if you get up tomorrow morning and consciously you said to yourself, why do I feel so grateful? Or why do I feel so happy? In a millisecond, your brain will look for an answer. It'll go into its unconscious and it'll pull some information out and it'll say, you live in a wonderful part of the country. You're surrounded by great people. You have a wonderful family. You're a winner. And you'll go out and you'll look for proof. You'll have a wonderful conversation with someone. You'll be more optimistic. You'll win a deal. And then I looked at those things that are unexplainable. And you've all had those happen where maybe you thought about somebody and the next day they appeared in your Facebook feed, or, the things that we just can't explain. And let me share one with you that actually comes from the province that most of you are in right now. And that happened to me years ago when I spoke at a conference in Toronto called the $1 Million Roundtable. Now, the $1 Million Roundtable is the top 1% of insurance reps in the world. And they always meet somewhere exotic. And the exotic location that I spoke at in Canada was Toronto. And the reason being is there's not a lot of places in Canada that can accommodate an 8,000 person audience. So hence they end up in these bigger centers. There's a young lady that was, after the conference was over, she left the conference, she was flying back to Vietnam, and she had a connecting flight at the LAX airport. When she gets to the LAX airport, she decides she wants to go to Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee. When she walks up to the counter, she orders a medium cup of coffee. Now, Starbucks is too fancy to sell medium coffees. They actually sell grandes, which actually doesn't even mean medium, but they sell you a grande cup of coffee. And when it arrives in front of her, she looks at it and she goes, oh my goodness, that is too much coffee for me. Unbeknown to her, right behind her in the same lineup were 3 young ladies that were on the same connecting flight to Vietnam. They looked at her and they said, well, why don't we order 2 cups of coffee? We'll ask them for an empty cup and we'll share the coffee among the 4 of us. So they sat down and they started sharing the coffee among the 4 of them. And the young lady who left the conference that I spoke at in Toronto, she looked at them and she said, I'm flying back to Vietnam. She said, I live in a city in Vietnam, but she said, I actually grew up in a village. She named the village and she said, we were so poor growing up that after my parents had 8 children, they gave the kids away. And the kids were raised by other families and worked the fields for those families. She said, I was given away. I wasn't raised by my biological parents. The other lady one of the other ladies at the table looked at her and they said, oh my goodness, I'm actually from the same village. Similar situation to you. We gave kids away as well, which is a very common practice in that area. She said, but unlike you, I was raised by my biological parents. At a chance meeting at the LAX airport, they discovered they were sisters. So that's when you're at the right place at the right time. So I said to myself, I said, well, Eddie, what if it didn't matter whether it was science, psychology, or something I couldn't explain? Is there something I could do to make more things go the way I want? And it comes down to one statement. Wherever you focus your attention and you put energy on that, you're going to bring more of that into your life. Now, to me, it's basically a statement that I absolutely live my life by. But let me dive a little bit into it so you can really get your head wrapped around it. So wherever you're focusing your attention is wherever you're focusing your internal thoughts. And here's the rub on this. Every single thought you have does one of two things. It moves you toward achieving your goals, or it moves you away from achieving your goals. And when I was sitting in the old Triangle pub with Stephen, I had conflicting thoughts. One thought was toward my goals, and I had an equal amount of thoughts against my goals. And sometimes we almost do that as an excuse, just in case things don't work out the way that we want. But here's the interesting thing. It's very subtle. You don't even know what's happening. So you're always kind of nudging one way or the other. The challenge we're having now is our thoughts are in so many negative places, it's hard for us to move toward our goals. And hence the second part. It's wherever we put our attention and we put our emotions. And here's the interesting thing about our emotions. When you're happy, passionate, excited, when you're on purpose, when you're engaged, something magic happens. We actually literally attract the things that we think about into our life, or we bring more of our goals into our life. And you all kind of know that when you're on fire, when things are going really well, you're more likely to achieve your goals. And I think we can understand that from a pure science perspective or a psychological perspective, that the more happy we are, the more on purpose, the more likely we are to move toward our goals. But when you pass boredom and you get into fear, anxiety, and stress, you literally push your goals away. And sometimes it's at a very unconscious level. You just don't have the right conversations. You're more lethargic. You don't solve problems as well. So sometimes we have to literally fake it. We have to figure out ways to make us more happy, passionate, excited, to think about things that will move us up in that direction, to help us in the areas of our life we might be struggling. And I don't think there's probably a time in my, time on this earth that this has been more important to me, to really, really focus my attention on things that make me feel more happy so that I can achieve the goals that I want to set out and do as well. So now I have to tell you, I am, as a professional speaker, I've had an incredible run at this. I've traveled all over the world. I have met literally the best people in every industry you can possibly think of. I know there's some real estate folks on the call today. I've spoken at real estate association meetings and companies all over North America. I've met the best realtors in the world. I've met the best doctors. I've met the best school teachers. I have never met anyone make it to the top by complaining. I've never seen it happen. I've seen people get ahead. My dad even had a saying for that. It's, squeaky wheel gets grease. And I think if you complain enough, you'll get something Thursday afternoon off, or a 25-cent raise or something. But long-lasting happiness comes from two things: focusing your attention on your goals and creating the right emotions to achieve them. That's where all of the success comes. And even if you took an honest look in your own life, you'll find that that's true in the areas that you're kind of knocking it out of the park. So how do we make it work? 3 steps. So let me walk you through the 3 steps, and hopefully you'll walk away with something that you can kind of put the paper right away and start using in certain areas of your life while we're in this little bit of a lockdown scenario. The first step is you got to figure out what goals you want to set. So a lot of times we kind of intuitively know, like maybe a New Year's resolution, you sat down and you wrote some goals down. For some people, it might be financial goals. You have a target at work you want to hit. Maybe you want to buy a new house or a car. You want to go back to school, or you want to lose some weight. So some goals are easy for us to identify. In fact, I often will get people to write their goals down. They can normally put 10 goals down pretty quick. A lot of goals are really hard for us to identify. So here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about your emotions. Now, what's odd about this, I want you to think about your negative emotions, the things that you're worrying about, because your negative emotions actually tell you a story. Now, I'm not a believer in dwelling in negative things. In fact, I am a big believer in living a very positive life, and I do literally walk that walk. But your negative emotions, the things that you worry about, actually are serving a purpose. And what they're doing is they're telling you the area of your life you want to make some changes. And I'll give you some examples. If you walked up a flight of stairs and you're short of breath and you don't feel good about yourself, or if you look at your children and you wonder how healthy you're going to be when you're 60 or 70 years old to be able to spend time with your children and grandchildren, It's telling you want to be more healthy. That stress is telling you want to be more healthy. If you're not hitting your number at work, that stress around not hitting your number is telling you want to hit your number. If you walk into a room and you feel stress or anxiety, and when you're with someone there, it's telling you want a better relationship. And it might be you want a better relationship with that person. Maybe you need to improve that relationship, or it might be telling you that you have some people in your life that are not serving you well, that are undermining your success. So use your emotions, your negative emotions, to help identify your goals. And then for me, what I try and do is then suppress those negative emotions and focus my attention on the positive side of achieving those goals. That's step number one. Now, in doing that, once I do that, I write them on a dream sheet. Now, there's two kind of things people often do. One will do dream sheets, some do vision boards. I'm a much bigger believer in dream sheets than vision boards. And what I do is I write down, and I do it by category: education, relationships, finance, social, spiritual, all of those different things. And something magic happens when we write something down. The brain has a kind of kinesthetic ability when we literally write things down. If you were to write things on a dream sheet and review the dream sheet for about 25, 30 days, 6 months from now, your life will be completely different. And the reason that happens is it gets impregnated into your unconscious, and there's a function the brain has which is called RAS, which is its ability to search through data to help you solve your problems and help you achieve your goals. And you've all experienced this, where maybe you set a goal and all of a sudden you start noticing all kinds of things that drew your attention to it. You want to buy a new car. You decide you're going to buy a Honda Civic. You notice every Honda Civic that's on the road. You want to buy a new house. All of a sudden you notice every house that has a for sale sign on it. What happens is, once we have it as a goal, our brain will help us move toward it. So that's step one. Identify what your goals are, write them on a dream sheet. Step two, you have to believe it. You have to believe you can achieve the goals that you're writing on your dream sheet. Now, I believe your goals should be a stretch, but I also believe they should be believable. And the reason being, if you look at any area of your life where you're achieving your goals, you actually believe you can do it. If you walked on a golf course and you're aiming to hit a 98 today and you want to break that 100, if you believe you can do it, you're much more likely to do it. If you're already broke 100, then you have that level of belief that you can do it. I personally, I would never walk on a golf course and believe I could break 100. Maybe in the first 8 or 9 holes, but not in the whole 18 holes. So for me, the belief wouldn't be there. So you have to have that level of belief in the goals that you set. It's literally the fuel that will allow you to achieve that level of success. And the last thing is, you want to become receptive. Now, I spend a lot of time coaching people, and I got to tell you, when it comes to goal setting, people are pretty good at identifying their goals. A lot of times they're even pretty good at believing they can do it. This is the area that most people fail at goal setting. And being receptive means allowing the goals to come into your life by becoming the person you would be as if you had already had them. And I always think of the area of my life that I personally struggle with the most. And for me, it is health. It is weight. So what I do is, if you were to take any area of your life where you're kind of knocking it out of the park, maybe you have a great relationship with someone and you wrote down all the things I would need to do to be an outstanding, husband or wife or spouse or best friend or mother or father, and you wrote them all down. And then next to it, you wrote down all the things that you're currently doing. If they're the same, then you're probably already great at it. But for me, health, I thought, well, let's do this, Eddie. Let's write it down. So I wrote a list of all of the things that I would need to do to maintain this beautiful body at 235 pounds. What would I eat? How much exercise would I do? What would I wear? What would my confidence level be? What would my energy level be? And then next to it, I wrote a list of what I would have to do or who I would be if I was 195 pounds. What would I wear? What would I eat? How much would I walk? And you know what? The lists were completely different. I wasn't that person. I wasn't the smaller version of Eddie. So what I did was I went out and I bought a watch that would monitor my steps. I started eating the 190-pound version of food that I would eat. I went out and bought the clothes that I would wear. And I literally, at one point, I went down to 175 pounds. But you have to become that person. Now, there's a little more to this, but if you can get your head wrapped around that, ask yourself, any area of my life that I'm not achieving my goals, am I acting, or am I the person I would have to be as if I already had it? And if you take an honest look, you might find that you're not. Now, I want to give you two things that will kind of help speed it up. The first thing is you have to give. And here's the interesting part with giving. You have to give in the area of your life that you're lacking the most. And here's what's interesting about that. If you look at the area of your life where you're really doing well, it's probably because you're giving 100% in that area of your life. You know, if you're really healthy and vibrant and full of energy, you're probably giving your body the water it needs, the food it needs, the loving, the caring, the pruning, the walking, the exercise. If you're knocking it out of the park at work, it's probably because you're giving it 100%. But ask yourself in the areas of your life that you might be struggling, are you giving it 100% in that area of your life? And you know, in the picture on the slide presentation here, I often think about the financial aspect of giving. You know, when we struggle financially, we tend to stop giving. But interestingly enough, if we give in times that we struggle financially, we actually tend to bring more success back into our life again. So if you are at a place right now where you're struggling financially to give, then give your time, give a kind word, volunteer, find ways you can do it, give an extra tip when you go to Tim Hortons or get a takeout, do something in some small way that will allow you to give in an area of your life where you might be struggling. And the last thing is to live in an attitude of gratitude. Now, there's something really interesting about gratitude. They say that next to love, gratitude is the most powerful emotion the human spirit has. So I have a few little tricks that I use around gratitude. I mean, if you think of the title of my book, Bring About What You Think About. If you think about things to be grateful for, chances are you're going to bring more things to be grateful into your life. So I have a few little tricks that I do that helps me, and you can find your own trigger. I carry a little pen in my pocket. It's a pen a staff had given me probably 20 years ago now, and I guard it with my life. I sign all my books with it. I was at the lawyer's the other day, and I had signed some contracts, and I signed it with the pen. For me, it's the magic pen. But every time I hold it, I think of something to be grateful. So when I put the pen down, I always think, well, what can I think of to be grateful for? So for me, it's a bit of a trigger. And the other thing that I do is I wear a little bracelet, and it's just a little beaded bracelet. I actually started wearing one a few years ago when a good friend of mine passed away. We started wearing them in his memory, but I started to attach gratitude to the bracelet. So normally I fly a lot, I travel a lot, and I literally count the beads. Now, I'm not Catholic, but I still believe in the gratitude. So as I count the beads, I think of something to be grateful for. So lots of times I'm sitting with my wife and watching television, and I'll take the beads out and I'll think of good things that happened that day to make me grateful. So for me, it draws me toward that gratitude. So giving and gratitude are ways to accelerate your success right now. And I want to kind of wrap up with first with a little bit of a story, and then some kind of special little things that I want to give you free access to kind of help you out with this. You know, when I stand in front of an audience, and like we're all adjusting to ways we do things, so this is a little different for me, although I've been doing videos for quite some time. My thing is I always want to impact someone's life. And I always think, is there a time in my life where somebody had a huge impact? And years ago, my wife and I decided we wanted to have children. And I'd have to say up until that point, I wasn't really fond of kids. You know, if I went somewhere there were kids, I normally left. But something happened. Early 20s, all of a sudden children looked adorable and we wanted to have our own, and we tried and we couldn't. And I remember going home to my wife one day and I said, look, Tanya, if this is meant to happen, it's going to happen. And I don't think it was a month later and Tanya was pregnant. And we lived in Alberta at the time, and we flew back to Halifax for Christmas, and Tanya fell down a flight of stairs and lost our child in a miscarriage. Now, I've never experienced anything like that. And I actually didn't know how many people are impacted by that until it happened to me. And I heard the stories. Even my mother had a miscarriage, which I never would have known. We flew back to Alberta, and a few months later, Tanya gets pregnant, and we flew both mothers out right around the birth of the child. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, Tanya says to me, she said, Eddie, it's time. I rushed her to the hospital, and after 36 hours, Tanya went into duress and they had to do an emergency C-section. Now, I remember thinking at the time, our baby's going to be born a screamer. I grew up in Cape Breton playing the guitar and singing with my friends. And I see this very quiet baby in a nurse's arms. And I follow down the hallway. And she said, "Are you Mr. LeMoine?" I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Congratulations, you have a little baby girl, but we need to run a few tests. Would you give us about 20 minutes?" I said, "Yeah, no, absolutely." So we went upstairs and got balloons and banners and had an order of fish and chips and went back down. I told the two mothers to wait, walked in the room where my child was, and the doctor, Fiorella, walked over and she looked at me and she said, "Are you Mr. LeMoine?" I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "I'm afraid I have bad news." She said, your baby was born with massive pneumonia, streptococcal B, and she has less than a 5% chance of surviving." Now, I've never experienced anything like that in my life. I walked in the room where my wife was, and for the first time in my life, I lost it. Now, for men who don't cry until you're later in your life, you become a basket case for the rest of your life. Extreme Home Makeover on Sunday night, when they moved that bus, I cry that much, I can't even see the television. But after about 3 days, the doctor said, "Eddie, put the birth announcement in the paper." And I remember talking to her and saying, "Dr. Fiorella, what did you do?" She said, "Your daughter's a miracle, I'll give you that." But she said, "I was in Toronto 2 weeks ago. We learned of an experimental procedure at the CMA conference. And I have actually spoken at that conference since then." And she said, "We tried that on your baby, and that's the only reason she's alive." Now, she went to a seminar and learned how to save my child's life. Now, you have spent about 25 minutes with me, and I don't have that. I don't have that silver bullet or that injection that can make you successful. But you know what? If you focus your attention more on the outcome, if you create the right emotion around that thought pattern to bring more of that into your life, if you just give more in areas of your life that you might lack, or live more grateful, and if you are in self-isolation, if you just hug the people around you. I would tell you to go over and hug your neighbors, but that's probably not a good thing right now. Then I've done my part today, this morning, to help you maybe move a little bit ahead, and for that, I'm very grateful. Now, I want to leave you with a couple things. We've created this online stress management program that we traditionally used to sell this, but once COVID started, we actually started giving it away, because I really believe a lot of people are struggling with stress right now. And I have to say, when I coach people, I think the number one thing that kind of steals our goals or robs us of our success is stress. So I think you'll find it a helpful little program. You'll identify some stressors and how to deal with them, and things that you can influence and things that you can't. And I think, and share it with whoever you want. I just love for more people to have access to it. We have another little thing. We have a little inspirational Monday video series. So every couple of weeks, you get a little 5-minute inspirational video series. It's actually content based on my book as well. So some of the stuff we talked about today would be in that. It's kind of great to sit down with your staff and do that. They run for maybe, I think, 6 to 8 weeks. So, and we'll be adding more to that as well. And then I want to leave you with, we have another little program that when I first started, I used to coach a lot of people, and obviously the amount of travel and stuff I did made that a little bit harder to do. And I really believe everyone should have a coach. I personally have a coach. It can be a little pricey. So what we did was we took all the content that we would normally do in a coaching exercise, and we created a series of videos, and we wrapped it around the book. So it's kind of like having me as a personal coach. And we're doing something different. We've never done this before. If you do purchase this program, so it's $60, we normally would sell that for $199 on our site. We're actually going to send you a PDF copy of the book as opposed to the book. Now, we're doing that because of COVID-19, and a lot of people are more comfortable doing it that way, but normally an author would never do that, because once you kind of start sending PDF copies of your book out there, you kind of lose control of it. But I really think it's the right thing to do right now. And I use the book in my own life. So I print a PDF copy off, and I print in the smaller format, and I write in the side. So for me, it kind of, works so well to do it that way. So what's going to happen, you're going to get an email in the next few minutes probably, and access all that free material will be there, more information on this. And there's also a little contact me form if you'd ever like to reach out to me, or if you have some questions that you're not comfortable asking here, I'd be delighted to ask that as well. So I'm going to pop this back to Scott. Hopefully he's got some questions. And I'm going to get out of this little presentation here. And there we go. Are you back, Scott?
I am back, yes.
Awesome.
Thank you, Eddie. That was amazing. I talked about crisis and opportunity at the beginning of the program, and I think you're definitely the right speaker for these times. So we appreciate all of that.
Well,
I want to remind everyone that's tuned in that we do have the Q&A box. If you do have any questions for Eddie, make sure you put them in the Q&A box. I know some people may have been raising their hand. We're not going to have a chance to go live, so you can ask the questions. So you do have to use the Q&A box, please. So Eddie, in the meantime, you've been saying that there's no better time in history than right now to hit the reset button. What makes you think that this is such a good time to do that?
well, actually, there's a study done just recently, and they said that 43% of people feel that they will come out of this pandemic um, having appreciated or learned new skills or be farther ahead. So all of us, I mean, I've been spending so much time learning new things myself, but we're seeing people spending time on their health, virtual workout classes, learning how to cook, learning how to play a musical instrument. There is this moment right now where the whole world has slowed down. I mean, we're seeing it in everything from the amount of pollution that we create on the planet to the amount of energy that we're using. So we have this opportunity where we can take this time and focus on an area of our life we might have been struggling a bit with. And I know personally, that's what I'm doing. I'm learning some new things, and I'm focusing on my health. I always go back to health. For me, it's the one thing I own and can control. So when things go off the rail, I always say, well, Eddie, the one thing you can control is your health. So let's work on that. So I just think it's a great time because we're all in this together.
The one question that's come in is a combination of a thank you and a question. So it's a thank you to you for such an uplifting session. So very much appreciated. And just a reminder about how everyone can access the free webinar and the presentations.
So everyone who registered up until about 9 o'clock this morning, an email will go out to you at exactly 10:30 your time. If I didn't catch it before that, or if you're on this webinar and you're on it without us having access to your email, then reach out to me and I'll send you a link that will give you access to it. Or if you sign in later this morning, Ashley will send me that information and we'll get an email out to you as well.
Yeah, and if all else fails, you can send an email directly to Ashley, and then Ashley can put you in touch with Eddie. So, and no matter how, we'll get you in touch with Eddie.
Absolutely.
Eddie, you talked about stress. You talked about and slowing people down, but at the same time, some people have sped up. Some people are working 2 or 3 times more now than they were pre-pandemic. So you've got different kinds of stress right now. You've got the stress of being bored, not doing anything, trying to stay in some kind of a routine. But you've also got the other people that are stressed by running at 1,000 miles an hour and never seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. How do you deal with both of those?
Well, actually, that's a really interesting question. And it's almost like the country is helping us take care of that. Like, I'm here in Nova Scotia, and, on top of the pandemic, we had the helicopter crisis, we had the mass shooting, and the recent snowbird crash, which the lady was from here. So we have a lot of things to be very stressful about. And I don't think I have ever seen our province with an outpouring of gratitude and love more than we're seeing right now. So I think when you're really stressed and if you happen to be, a frontline worker, or you're working in the, my son is a frontline worker, or if you're working in the grocery stores or something like that, and you're under stress and under pressure, I think the thing you really want to embrace is that gratitude, the amount of appreciation that people have. So for me, I always think of it kind of like the old scales, like the justice scales. So if stress of something is bringing it down, find something on the other end of the scale to bring it up. So if stress of working long hours, all of that is bringing it down, then look at gratitude and love and those types of things that kind of bring it to the other end. And I really think a lot of people right now are really starting to reappreciate their own families more than before, because the interaction is there as well. So, obviously my heart goes out for anyone that's in that situation, but find ways. And for me, gratitude is always one that I use to kind of move my way back up that scale.
Yeah, it's hard too because oftentimes in difficult times, people will turn to their friends and have that circle of friends that they can rely on and even hug, which we can't do right now. So people that are going through challenging times with death or whatever it may be are finding it even more difficult now.
Well, it's interesting you'd say hug, because our brain has the ability to create a hormone called oxytocin, and it's literally called the cuddle hormone. And one of the things that activates the cuddle hormone is hugging. So they say when you're under a lot of stress, go home and hug someone, hug your family, so we're kind of contained to that, hugging of our family. And a lot of us are huggers. So when I'm on the road and I'm speaking, I mean, we're hugging people all the time. You get to the back of the room and we're shaking hands, we're hugging. So there's that physical connection that's really important. So the other thing that can help activate that oxytocin hormone, which makes us feel better, in addition to hugging, is actually confiding in people. So if you're under a lot of stress, under a lot of pressure, and you want to act, and the oxytocin serves not just, it literally goes to your heart and helps to heal your heart. It expands the arteries around the heart. So there's some real benefit to oxytocin. Confide in people. So if you can't physically get out and give someone a hug or get over and talk to your neighbor, then call them on the phone or get on FaceTime. Our family, we're doing these party chats and FaceTime, and to us, it brought us very close together. In fact, for many of us, we're talking to each other more now than we did even before the pandemic.
So one person is saying that there are a lot of companies out there that are fortunate in a way because they're open, they're working remotely, staff are still being paid. So they're feeling, again, very lucky in this pandemic, and this idea of practicing gratitude is resonating with this person. So the question is, how can their business, their association, give back to those that may have been terribly affected by the pandemic?
Well, I think everyone has an opportunity to give in some sense. In our business, because I'm in the training and speaking business, we literally lost 100% of our revenue. And and my wife and I, we're in a pretty good spot, so I'm okay with that. So what I wanted to do was find ways that we could give back. So how do we stay relevant? How do we give back? And so we're always doing volunteer work or spending time doing something to give back. And to be totally truthful, you almost do it from a little bit of a selfish perspective because you feel really good when you do it. So kind of look at what you produce, what you do in your organization, and ask yourself, is there something I can do to give back? I mean, we're seeing people, in restaurants give meals to frontline workers. There's just so many things that creative ways that people have come up with. My wife and I went out and bought some masks for ourselves and our friends. And there's this lady that had this business where she would alternate wedding gowns. My daughter's getting married, and that's how we knew. And we knew she was struggling. So she's now making masks for people. So find a thing you can do to kind of give back, and then you'll feel that gratitude. And it's very, very powerful.
One person, again, is thanking you for the incredible session and for sharing the story of the birth of your child. This person has 6 millennials at home under the isolation roof. So just wondering about any tips you can provide with relationships with millennials at this time. This person says their children are very, very wonderful, and they want to love them more in a way that they will appreciate that's not cringy.
Well, that's a really interesting thing, because there's 2 topics that I talk on. I do this bring about what you think about talk, and I've spoken to every industry you can think of on this, but I'm actually one of Canada's leading experts of the impact of the aging demographics. So the other topic I talk about is employee engagement. And one of the areas of that we talk about quite a bit is the multi-generational psyche that we have going on. So right now in a lot of organizations, there are literally 5 generations that work together. So we have from Gen Z, which would be born after 1995 all the way up to the mature generation. So um, the one thing that I always try and tell people when it comes to multi-generation is that you have to appreciate what that generation brings and the uniqueness they have, and realize that they grew up in a very unique time that's very, very different than what we would have grown up in. Like, you know, for example, you know, when we look at technology, the millennials are much more plugged into technology. And even if I look at my daughter, who's a millennial, she's kind of cruising through this pandemic better than other generations might, because they immediately adapted to Zoom and Teams and all of the ways they interact. So for me, it's to look at the generation and really not think about what's different about it, but embrace that difference, you know, and how we can, so find that time that you can be with that generation, really appreciate who they are based on their generation. And I often say, you know, when I'm in front of an audience, if you're, you know, 55 years old and you're talking to someone that's 22, you may as well talk to a squirrel. And it's not because the person is a squirrel, it's because their language is so different. You know, I use Facebook. My daughter says, Dad, like old people use Facebook, you know, you should be using Instagram. And I FaceTime my parents, I text my kids, because they respond different to different technologies. So I would just embrace the difference, and really, you're gonna look back at this time and be so grateful that you got the time to spend together, but you're also gonna be very grateful when it's over.
Your daughter probably even cringed when you printed the PDF.
Yes, yes. and I notorious for, like, I'll put stuff on social media, and if you kind of look, for the first time in history, younger generations are now having more of an influence over older people. So anyone that's on this webinar that's, you know, in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, your kids got you into social media. And in the past, older people normally led younger people. And what's really interesting, and I always use Facebook as an example, as more older people got on Facebook, more younger people left, because they said it's just full of a bunch of old people. So even now, I'll be somewhere and I'll say, you know, enjoying this, giving a presentation here in California, and my mother will put on the comments underneath, you look like you're losing too much weight. So for me, you know, different mediums are different, but for my daughter, she would call me an old person when it comes to social media.
Yeah, I found it interesting at the beginning of your talk. You were talking about being the Triangle Pub, and talking about all the books you've read that you actually didn't put into action. It reminded me, you know, so often we go to conferences as well, and I'm sure it's different when you're a speaker, but sometimes, you know, you hear the speaker and you get energized and you go back to work and you get so busy you forget about all the things that you learned or all the things you needed to implement. Where you've got, you know, reams of paper with notes about all the things you're going to change when you get back to work, and then you put it in a file and forget about it. So remind us how we have to put things like that into our day-to-day lives.
And I, you know, I mean, I've probably read 40,000 pages when it comes to personal development. It's a real passion of mine. And I think people try and make this stuff way too complicated. It's 3 steps: identify your goals, believe you can do it, and become the person you need to be as if you'd already had the goal. If you can figure those 3 steps out, and you can go a little bit deeper into that, obviously, and you're already doing it. Everyone that's on this call, you're already using that principle to bring success into your life. You just didn't realize that you can probably use it in another area of your life that you might be struggling, and use the exact same thing.
So questions come in: how can we influence a friend or loved one to start focusing and working on life goals, especially if they seem to be all over the place with their own life plans?
You know, that's an interesting, if you're talking about your children, and I've always said, pick your battles. And the decisions that your children are making now are probably, they may change. I mean, I didn't figure out what I wanted to do. I had a very successful career, but I really didn't figure out what I wanted to be until I was probably 45 years old. So I think that can obviously change. The key with this, and I've done a lot of research around, you know, the way our brain works, we can't change the way someone else thinks. It only works on ourselves. So I can use the principles that I talk about in the book in my own life personally to change areas of my life. But all I can do with people around me is influence them by getting them to think about things. So I'm always that kind of devil's advocate. If somebody says, you know, like this place looks terrible, it's under construction. I always say, well, think of how nice it's going to look when it's done. Like for me, I always look to the other side. And what really is interesting when I think about it, when I first started this path, and it was probably back in 2005 when I really started to head down this path, there were friends of mine that literally stopped hanging around with me. They enjoyed the banter when we were negative, and they didn't like the new positive version of me. So for me, it's there are people around me that I did influence, that I made them look that way, and if they see results in you, like if you start doing something and you lose weight, or you're more healthy, or you find the person of your dreams, and then you say to them, well, this is what I did, then you're more apt to influence them. But the worst thing I think we could do is try and force someone, or go to them and say, you're not thinking positive, and that's why you're not succeeding. You really want to nudge them along to that way of thinking.
So two reminders for everyone that's tuned in. The Q&A box is there if you do have any more questions, and also a reminder that we are taping this session. So if you wanted to look back on it, it will be on the Chamber's website under our COVID resource section. So Eddie, you were talking in the beginning about dream sheets versus vision boards. So can you go over that and remind us, what the difference is?
Sure. A lot of people write a vision board. So if you don't understand what the vision board is, it's basically you're taking a bunch of pictures of things that are your goals, and you're putting them on a vision board and putting them in your cubicle or in your office. And I personally use a dream sheet. And the reason why I prefer a dream sheet over a vision board, and they both work quite well actually, is that if you think about the scale, happy, passionate, excited on one side of the scale, and then fear, anxiety, and stress on the other. Lots of times people have well-meaning friends, and they, that will try and help you along when they know you have a goal. And so, for example, if you put a picture of Angela Jolene up on a vision board and thought that was the person that you wanted to marry in your life, and your friends come along and go, Scott, that's never going to happen. Like, she is so far out of your league. Or you put this house up on a vision board that's this beautiful house, and your friends come in and say, you're never going to make enough money to buy that house. Then what I have to do is I now have to overcome their opposition. So I'm always conscious of who's pulling me down on that scale and who's helping or encourage me to move up in the scale. When you put it on a dream sheet, I only then have to share it with people I trust. So for me, it's normally my wife. We're very in sync. We're soulmates. We have the same goals. So I share with her, and she encourages me, which brings me up on that scale. If you have a friend that says to you, I'm only telling you this because I'm your friend and I'm protecting you, to me, they're more of a frenemy. They're acting like a friend, but they're actually more of an enemy because they're undermining your success. So for me, I'm always thinking, how do I keep up on that scale? So that's why I think the hardest thing with the pandemic is so many people are slipping down into that fear, anxiety, and stress, and it's undermining their success, whether it's their diet or their work or their, and limiting beliefs is the other one that really, Eddie, that might work for you, it's not going to work for me, or that'll work in Halifax and won't work in Milton, or I'm not educated enough, not pretty enough. I can't succeed because of the pandemic. Nobody's going to go outside and look at our product. Like, be very careful what you're saying to yourself and limiting your success.
There are a lot of people, they're talking about one of the negatives that will come out of the pandemic is people's mental health, and people, right now are suffering, and so the question now is, currently and post-pandemic, how do people really take care of their own personal mental health and also help those people around them?
It's an interesting question, because I know here in Nova Scotia, we're opening certain things probably, I would almost say, ahead of what the Department of Health would probably like. And the thing that's driving that, and they've said this quite a bit in the media, is that the impact of the mental health of the pandemic is now starting to really weigh on people, and that they want to get people out socializing in some way to help, offset this mental. So, I mean, I am not by any stretch of the imagination any kind of a mental health expert. But for me, it's always, I'm very, very conscious of my feelings and my emotions. I literally even monitor my stress on my watch. So if I see my stress, you know, if you have one of these watches that monitor stress, I try and keep it down, you know, between 5 and 25. If it goes up to 75, I'll meditate, or I'll go back to triggers that I have, or ways that I can help with when I'm under stress. So I think the first part of it is being conscious of it, and don't feel bad asking for help. And then there are resources out there that you can help. And I know even if you do the chamber medical plan, there's that telemed service that they have if you're having struggles. So talk to people, do whatever you can to help offset it. But if it's really bad, then I would, you know, get some expert advice for sure.
So Eddie, do you believe in the power of routine then? And if so, what does yours look like?
So I have some routine. I walk every morning. So I walk and I try and get 10,000 steps in every morning. I do it for a couple of reasons. One is for my health, but I really think it's important to get outside and get some vitamin D. And so I walk, doesn't matter what the weather, cold, warm, wet, I get out all the time. I have certain things that I do around goal setting. I even write affirmations. So we didn't talk about that. And I think if you got to know me, you'd realize how deep this actually goes with me. I'm always trying to reprogram my thinking to be more positive and move. I normally am on some kind of a dietary routine. I find if I'm not doing something, I'm eating everything. So for me, if there's an area of my life that I struggle with, then I have to get routines around that area. But other than that, I'm pretty spontaneous. I don't eat at the same time every day. I change the way I do things. Even when I speak in front of an audience, I never have notes. I just, to me, it comes from my heart.
I'm conscious of everyone's time. We're coming up on an hour now. So I think we will wrap up. Eddie, again, it's been such a phenomenal session. I can tell from the questions that are coming in and some of the reactions that everyone is very impressed with not just your words, but also your presentation style and how comfortable it is to listen to you. So we truly appreciate it. I said you're the right speaker at the right time, and I believe that. I think as we're coming out of this pandemic on the road to recovery, we need people like you to uplift us. So thank you.
No,
it's
my pleasure. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to segue and also say that we thank our friends at the Oakville Milton Real Estate Board as well. So a double thank you.
No, and I second that, and the only thing I wish I could have done was looked in the eyes of the people in the audience, because there's actually there's a real energy you get from presenting in front of an audience, and so I tried to peek in that camera as much as I can. So I was looking in your eyes as best as I can. So, but I'm honored and very grateful that you invited me to speak to your group today. I really appreciate it.
That's perfect. Again, Eddie, thank you. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. And that's going to wrap it for this episode of COVID Conversations, Members Helping Members. And Eddie, we'll make you an honorary member of the Milton Chamber of Commerce.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So anyway, thank you everyone for tuning in. Take care.
Bye-bye.